you've probably seen this, right? And we purposely, again, just like you heard in the video, we put business and industry at the center. Now, if there's any part of your brain or heart that's saying, whoa, 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 is that a good idea, right? I mean, industry doesn't always know what community members really need and workers and job seekers and students really need. Like, this may not be a good idea, right? And there's a risk here, and I'm just going to put it out there very bluntly. Don't get political about this, right? Because there's a risk there. Here's what we're doing. We are actually it was a business member in Colorado who I think described this so beautifully. It was Paul Harder, a manufacturer who was involved in the Northern Colorado Manufacturing Partnership originally, who said, I realized in participating in my manufacturing partnership, it wasn't about us being at the center, and calling all the shots. It was about getting businesses and companies to step in and step up in a way that we just don't usually do. We are responders to surveys. We are responders to grants and initiatives when we're asked, but we don't step up to the front of the room together to co-identify the challenges, the root causes to those challenges, and then the solutions that need to be brought to bear on behalf of our companies and the workers and communities in our region. And so it's not necessarily industry at the center because they're somehow more important. It's industry stepping in and stepping up, because that is what makes a public-private partnership and collaboration work, right, around common and shared needs. And that's so, so critical. And quite honestly, nationally and historically, we collectively kind of do a pretty bad job at that, right? Partly because we don't know how, partly because it's just something that isn't really in our wheelhouse to facilitate and give employers space to grow and mobilize together. So if we jump to the next slide here, what we'll see, and you might be very familiar with this graphic, if not, let me describe it. Business definitely is mobilized together, and they're at the center because they need that space to really co-create and identify the problems and solutions. But really integrated around, wrapping arms around where the industry is going, is an incredible team, right, of everybody that's in your region already. It's CTE, adult education, K through 12, community colleges and universities, it's chambers of commerce and other economic development entities, it's community-based organizations that have a stake in this industry succeeding, right, whether they're working on the worker behalf or the economic development behalf. It's definitely workforce development boards and the many different core partners that come into play there. And then, as the Brookings quote, which we really love and share a lot, pointed out, somebody has to be the quarterback here, right? Somebody has got to be in the organizing role. That convener doesn't set the agenda, but they are organizing. And again, they come with a pretty specific skill set that we'll get into. So if you have that mental model in your head, we'll jump to the next slide. Because here's what we also like, is just a pretty clear definition of what this is. For those of you who like the word version versus the visual version, this is regional. It is not statewide. There's always a time and a place, right, for a blue ribbon task force on healthcare, right, or a statewide manufacturing council. But these are regional, because manufacturing in the Pueblo area is going to be very different, right, than manufacturing in the Fort Collins area. Even healthcare is going to look very, very different, especially from metro to rural. And so it's really important that they're regional and they respect that place. These are place-based. They are partnerships of business leaders within that industry who work together with their public partners and a whole array of public partners. If you haven't caught on yet, these are not workforce-only initiatives. We believe very, very strongly, to some of Francie's earlier points, that sustainability of employer engagement requires that you are integrating economic development with education and training and workforce development. And if you take it too narrow, it becomes an initiative. We're not building an initiative, we're building a partnership. This is different from a lot of other things that we do. And so hopefully these are fairly obvious, especially for those of you who are one of these, right? You work for a workforce development board, or you're the director of, you're with a chamber of commerce. Those are entities that are important and play a role. They are not in themselves a partnership like we're describing, right? So just because you convene employers or companies or have them on your membership list does not make you a sector partnership, right? It has got to be a distinct entity of employers and companies within a similar industry in a similar region. Similarly, these are not education advisory boards, right? Which we are all required if we're in education at whatever level, required to usually have, right? Some sort of board of employers that are checking your curriculum and your credentials. Not the same thing. In the best cases, though, they play a role and they are integrated. Career pathway employer groups, economic development organizations. You can see here, right, the whole list of potential confusion. And so it's important to us to really be clear that these are different. The ones at the bottom, I'm going to say, like focus groups and skills panels, sector training initiatives, those really should come out of a strong sector partnership, right? And so one way to look at this too is, how do all of these either entities or types of activities like focus groups or roundtables and summits actually integrate with a strong sector partnership and even become some of the major activities or tracks that a sector partnership is going on. So in a nutshell, when we kind of sift and sort it all out, these are the three operating principles that distinguish a next-gen sector partnership approach from traditional sector initiatives or workforce development approaches. One, it's about the pull of industry. How do we mobilize an industry, its companies and businesses in a like region, so that they are pulling what's needed from the many, many different education, training, economic development, and other support partners, as opposed to having each of them having to push their programs and initiatives on employers. This is a shared table, and this is really important because we often see the first nail in the coffin of an emerging next-gen sector partnership is when one institution tries to own it. And so it's important to understand, especially as a convening entity or a co-convening pair of entities, that this is about building a shared table, not owned by a single institution or a system. That requires a really well-coordinated and facilitated integrated response from education and workforce and economic development versus one-off solutions, again, going too far down the line of narrow initiatives. So with that, that was a lot. We're throwing up just some examples here from different regions and different industries, again, to try to reiterate that there's nothing special in the water where these exist well. They exist in manufacturing and healthcare in lots of places for solid reasons. Manufacturing and healthcare are always the top most critical jobs drivers of almost any economy, and that's true for rural as well as metro. But there's other types of industries as well. So you'll see some technology on here, shipbuilding supply chain, a very unique one. You'll also see very different types of places, right? Because if whether you're in Washington, DC or Chicago or Seattle, that's going to be super different than East Texas, which is extremely rural, deep forest country that doesn't look anything like the south side of Chicago.